Good evening, everyone. We're just getting everyone into the session, but in the meantime, if you can just please put your mic on mute. We'll appreciate that. Obviously, we'll do the questions and all that afterwards, so then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Once again, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We have Gavin Groves is going to present digital health and the PGA Pro, FAD or fundamental. So without any further ado, Gavin, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Awesome. Thank you. No pressure on me, huh?
No, not at all.
Gosh. Alrighty. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I know time is money, and it's kind of there was a lot of traffic up in Joburg. I don't know who else had to deal with traffic, but I managed to get home and all here. Quite excited to share this with you. So I've got a bit of time at the end of the presentation for some questions and that. So if you've got anything that pops up or you don't want to forget it, just maybe type it down and then we can kind of address some of those towards the end. I'll try and not be too long-winded, but I can't promise anything. So basically how I got to this topic was a little bit of a self journey. Being a busy person who works long hours, you being able to manage yourself a little bit better so that we don't end up being a victim of burnout. I started investigating a little bit more of the health data and obviously over the journey that I've been on. Let me see if I can click here to see if that works. Oh, there we go. So going into golf and trying to marry golf and fitness, TPI was obviously at the fore back in, I want to say back in those days. I suppose you could say back in those days nowadays. But sort of around 20 years ago, trying to marry the idea of health and fitness and golf, and obviously spending a bit of time with all the golf, starting the TPI journey. Gosh, in the early days back in 2007, and then obviously being a member of the PGA from 2008, trying to make that link between the two, and kind of there was a lot of stagnation. There was a lot of delayed uptake of fitness up until probably about the 2010s and beyond. And then in 2018, I remember going to the Golf Fitness Summit, and there was a huge shift in fitness, but not just about performance training, but a little bit more into the health and wellness side, and more specifically the wearable, and how to use the wearable to be able to basically what's the word I'm looking for now? Create a tangible number to work with. When we talk about sleep, when we talk about recovery, because those kinds of things were generally only being measured in a laboratory. So, fast forward a few years, obviously the cell phone has become this sort of centerfold when it comes to a lot of our work. We do a lot of golf lessons on there. We do a lot of our fitness programs on there. So, the advancements of the smartphone and apps within the smartphone have really accelerated all of this. But basically, post-COVID, there was a big push towards understanding the body, understanding health, and obviously with AI coming into the fore, we've really seen some serious advancements. So, kind of to get back to the reason why I wanted this topic, one of the biggest changes that we've seen, and this came off the back of a conversation I listened to between Dr. Izzy Justice and Dr. Carl Morris. They were talking about the mental health in golf, and they were talking about the idea that basically the weekend was designed to be more of a physical rest. If you go back to pre-cell phones, back in the Nokia 3310s and 3330s and Snake on your phone, your typical workday was very much a 9 to 5 or a 7 to 3. And if you left the office or left the golf course, then no one could really get hold of you. So it was very much a definitive time that you spent at work. And we obviously spent less time in traffic. There were less vehicles on the road. And a lot of the news and information that we now get on our phones, you only really heard through TV or radio, newspapers, and things like that. So essentially, like, we were quite sheltered, to be honest. One of the other things, because of automation, or lack of automation back then, our jobs were very practical. You walked up and down stairs a lot more. Jobs were generally more physically demanding. And also, it was a lot easier to live. The cost of living was a lot lower back then. I think what the stories of parents paying £2 for a liter of petrol, like, those are kind of surreal for now. So basically, what's happened is that through the digital age, the advancement of the cell phone, with your cell phone almost being like an extension of your body, and you spend a lot more time connected to information. And because we're more connected to our information, we're more connected to our emails, we're more connected to our clients. And what that's started to do is it's created this sort of fluid work home boundary where there's a lot of gray area around, clients phoning you for a lesson, or someone wants to book a training session with you, and it's at 7 o'clock at night and you're busy having dinner, but your cell phone goes off. So there's this real need now to be able to put boundaries in place. Otherwise, it just becomes basically a 24/7 kind of job. And one of the other things that we've seen basically since 2000, I want to say 2008, is people's discretionary time has become less. So people work more. The standard of living has gone up. So, or the cost of living has gone up, which means that we're having to work harder for those rands and dollars, which leaves us with less recreational time and therefore obviously less rest. So all that to say, like, I think that there can be a way that we can use some of this technology to better manage ourselves, so that we don't end up in a situation where we are the victim of burnout, or we are the victim of stress. I know stress is almost unavoidable, but there are ways and very practical things that we can do to manage that a little better. And that's kind of been my journey with my wearables specifically. So I've always been a watch guy. So I've got a Garmin, and I used to sleep with it. You wear it all the time. I use it for my training. And about 8 or 9 months ago now, I actually came across the Ultra Human Ring. So not a marketing blurb, but basically a wearable that's an alternative to a wristwatch, which is cool. So, and what we found was that the sleep data on this was really accurate, and it was a lot more convenient for me to wear a ring rather than wearing my watch all the time. And what that's done is it's put me a little bit more in touch with my data, my health data. And I basically use that to help manage my sleep and my recovery and that kind of thing, which has been a little bit of a lifesaver. When you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you need to be able to manage your time. Starting a new business, you don't have a lot of holiday time either. So it's necessary to take small breaks in between. So, which I'll get into in a minute. But, like, we're in the business of touching lives through the game of golf. And I think, because we are the people right in the front line, how we interact with our clients, how we interact with our players, how we interact with other people within the industry matters. And I think if we are running on fumes, I don't think we're necessarily presenting the best version of ourselves to the kind of clientele that we have. And I've noticed that we almost need to take a sort of athlete-based mentality where you think of yourself as an athlete that needs to perform most days. And in order to do that, obviously, there's a lot of intentional things that you've got to do. So when we look at something like an athlete mindset, like I said, you want to try and give yourself, be able to give your best to your clients. I mean, I think everyone has that mindset. But in order to do that, we need to be able to measure some stuff, because we can't just arrive there feeling good or feeling bad, because that's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. So, what are the kinds of things that we can measure? So interesting thing about wearables, according to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute in the US, where we see a lot of mirroring when it comes to trends. 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3 Americans have a wearable device, and of them, the majority of them are sharing that kind of data with their doctors. Previously, if you wanted to measure your sleep, you would have to go into a laboratory, and they would put you into a very controlled environment, and they would essentially measure your sleep that way. Nowadays, you can literally wear a ring or a band around your wrist, and you can get some fairly concise sleep data, which is amazing. But also, information is nothing if you're not going to do something with it. So I think from the outset, when we go through some of these next slides, I want to say from the beginning that nothing is an absolute, in terms of like the data that we're using. So it doesn't mean that if you sleep badly you're going to have a bad day, or if your heart rate's high, that's that's it for you. But I think it's important to understand the data and understand the trends of the data, and being able to use that to make I want to say educated changes to your day, so that you can, again, put your best foot forward and obviously look after yourself first and foremost. Hope I am going okay. If anyone's having an issue, just chat. So, I mean, the wearable landscape now is pretty diverse. Like, there's lots of different options out there. I think that a lot of it comes down to personal preference. Obviously, budget has a role to play in this kind of thing. There are subscription-based wearables where you pay a monthly amount for access to your data, as well as the rental of the unit, almost like a lease kind of style. You've also got your once-off costs. You've got wearables that are subsidized by your medical aid. So it is quite a diverse landscape when it comes to choosing what kind of wearable that you want to use. And I think what is kind of important is personal preference, firstly. Secondly, the thing is, you've got to wear it consistently. So there are certain wearables that give you great information, but they don't necessarily have the battery life to be able to wear them all the time or most of the time. There's a fair amount of charging that has to take place. So I think, when it comes to choosing a wearable, there are a couple of factors that you want to take into account. It was quite interesting listening to Will Ahmed, who's the co-founder of Whoop. And obviously Whoop is a fairly prevalent wearable, especially on the PGA Tour. I know a couple of the golfers have actually invested in the company. But he was talking about, creating a wearable that essentially disappears. So you get your visible versus invisible kind of wearable. So typically a visible kind of wearable would be a watch with helpful information there, like time, or it connects to your phone, plays music. It has that kind of function to it, versus literally a band or a ring where it kind of disappears on your body, and you can then wear either a normal watch, or you can then wear a different kind of time-based wearable. So, like I said, it's quite diverse. I might get into a little bit of that, and hopefully after we've gone through some of the presentation, maybe your mind will be, or the questions around what kind of wearable you want to use would be answered. So if we have a look at some of the key metrics, there are obviously a plethora of things that you can measure when it comes to your wearable itself. For me, one of the most important things that we're going to measure is sleep. So when I chat to some of the elite golfers that I work with, especially those that travel, their hotel room environments change quite regularly. Not everything is controlled in that manner, and so we run the risk of having their sleep being disrupted. So asking the question, how did you sleep, is not really a valid question when it comes to working with elite athletes. We need something that's a little bit more tangible than that. And some of the wearables these days will give you some really good data into sleep, but sleep is one of the metrics that we want to look at. HRV is another one. So heart rate variability, which I'll get to in a second, is so everyone knows what heart rate is. So heart rate is basically how many times your heart beats per minute. Heart rate variability is essentially the difference in time between two adjacent heartbeats. It's one of the key measures for recovery. It's also one of the key measures or metrics for adaptability. So for me as a trainer, as a fitness trainer, if I bring a variable into the equation, like training or stretching or ice baths, I want to be able to see whether the body can adapt and adapt positively. If the body's not able to adapt, then we know either the variable that you're bringing in is too much, or the person is not able to adapt, which obviously then helps us in terms of our next steps. So HRV also varies quite a bit between people, but I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. And obviously it changes, from day to day or week to week. So it's not just about what it is on the day, but it's also about what the trends are. Recovery is another thing that we measure. So looking at all the different elements that we look at in terms of recovery. Obviously, sleep has a huge role to play in that, and how we balance our sleep and recovery with the amount of load that we have, which is the next point, which is strain. I said lots of different words for that, so I'll get into that in a bit. But basically, quantifying your load in the day. So busier days will have a higher load or strain. Lighter days have a lower strain, and it's important to kind of have a bit of a balance between your strain and your recovery to ensure that we're not in a state of overreaching. We kind of want to balance that out a little bit. And then obviously using a wearable is your traditional methods of using a wearable, which is like measuring the amount of steps that you take in a day, or if you put it on in the gym and you want to do a cardio session, you can measure that session as an activity, or even on the golf course, and you can measure those metrics in a traditional sense. So there's lots of benefits to using a wearable. So it's not obviously just the health side of things, but there is more than just the activities which we're trying to measure. So to get into a little bit more of the sleep side of things. So for me, sleep is probably the most important weapon when it comes to recovery. It's also the first variable that people will compromise when they have deadlines, or if they have to wake up early, or if they would like to watch a movie late, or that series that you like binging, that tends to creep on the sleep, so to speak. So for me, like, sleep is one of the most important things that I look at when it comes to working with an athlete. At the end of the day, I break the body down in the gym. We break the body down on the golf course, and the body needs time to recover. And the only time it's going to do that is when you're actually the least active or sleeping. So at the end of the day, more is better when it comes to sleep. Volume of sleep is important. There's the age-old saying that 8 hours of sleep is enough. If you're an athlete, especially an elite athlete, you have to try and consider sleeping more than that. But once you are sleeping a sufficient amount of time, then we start to look at, okay, what does that sleep look like? Is it consistent? So consistency of sleep is really, really important. Our bodies are literally designed and based around rhythms. So the rhythm of your sleep, going to bed roughly the same time every night, waking up roughly the same time every morning, doing very similar things throughout the day are important, because your body responds positively to routine. So we look at timing of sleep. So again, if you are in the habit, I guess, of changing your morning wake up time, what that does is it often messes with what we call the circadian rhythm, which is essentially your body's biological clock, driven around the sun rising and the sun setting. So if you are the kind of person who likes a late sleep on a day off, that could almost be counterproductive to your recovery, even though you are sleeping more. So the consistency of our sleep, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time is really important. And I know that Professor Andrew Huberman, who I read a lot of his stuff on sleep, he talks a lot about starting your circadian rhythm based off the morning times. So if you want to get into better sleep time habits, nighttime habits, start in the morning and actually work from there. When we start to look at the description of sleep, so a little bit more of the meat and bones, we look at how much time you're spending in all the different stages of sleep. So you get a few different stages. So REM is basically your mental recovery. It's your mental restoration. REM sleep often happens towards the latter part of our sleep, so more early hours of the morning, and also the last portion of your sleep cycle. So sleep cycle is basically the full cycle of being awake, falling asleep, going into deep sleep, and then going into your REM and that cycle. And then you wake up slightly and that cycle repeats itself. So REM is the mental restoration. And if you are looking at your sleep data, you should be spending roughly around 25% of your time in REM sleep. So that's a nice metric to look at if you're waking up and you're feeling slightly tired, or if you're feeling a little mentally hazy. Oftentimes you will see a link between your mental state or emotional state and your REM sleep. Now, there are things that you can do to help improve your REM sleep. So very practically, one of the things that you can do is reading with a side lamp has been shown to increase REM sleep by 15 to 20%. So that's a super helpful tip that you can take. It doesn't have to be very educational in terms of the reading. So often fictional stuff is fine. But yeah, a little bit of reading can help improve your REM. Your shortwave or your deep sleep is where we do most of our physical recovery. So that's where a lot of your growth hormone, testosterone, that kind of thing is released. And it is most of the time that is between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., which puts a lot of alarm bells up, because obviously a lot of us don't get to bed before 10 o'clock. That was a bit of a shift for me with having to wake up on a regular basis at 5 o'clock. You sort of reverse engineer your nights, and you realize you've got to be in bed by 9, which actually gets more attractive as you get older. It's quite nice to go to bed early. But yeah, so shortwave or deep sleep is our physical restoration. So again, if we're talking about breaking the body down in the gym or spending long hours on the driving range, that's where the body breaks itself down, and we need to recover during the hours of 10 and 2. So that might require shifting your bedtime hours, which is tough to do if you're waking up late as well. So sometimes the early wake up time will actually make you more tired earlier in the evening, so that you actually go to bed earlier. And then you also get light sleep. So light sleep is typically a mental state where you're sort of awake, but you're not really awake. It's also maybe where you turn around, you change positions. So that also is one of the phases of your sleep as well. Obviously, depending on the ambient temperatures of the bedroom, will also dictate how much time you spend in your light sleep. So, but I'll get into that in a second. So the other thing, when it comes to volume of sleep, is you get this thing called sleep debt. Now, sleep debt for me is, again, important for elite athletes. If we're talking about being able to perform week in and week out, especially if they're traveling, they're overseas, they're on planes, there is this variable where they don't get enough sleep. There also might be a function or something on, and so we need to take those kinds of things into account. But sleep debt is basically based off the amount of time that you need. If you fall short of that, you go into a bit of debt. You can accumulate debt. Up to about 50 hours is about the maximum that you can accumulate. Thereafter, you don't go into more. So don't worry if you're not a good sleeper, you're not in 45,000 hours of sleep debt. But you can also go into sleep surplus. So being able to look at your sleep data especially your sleep data over time, you can start to see, all right, if I have a bad week here and there, that's okay, as long as I don't have 3 or 4 weeks of continuous sleep debt, because what that does is it puts your body into a stressful state. Your cortisol levels go up. It makes you more susceptible to getting sick, makes you more susceptible to getting injured, and also has an effect on your mental and emotional state too. So we want to make sure that when you look at your sleep debt as well as your sleep data, that yes, the day-to-day matters, but also if we look at trends, so if you look at the week, and even if you look at the month, you can see where the shortfalls are, and you can make adjustments accordingly. So I've just taken a screenshot of 2 examples. So I'll use my mouse over here. So here's an example of not a great amount of sleep. You'll see time in bed was only 5 hours. So over here, we've got, that's the amount of time I spent awake. So of the 5 hours, I spent 1 hour and 12 minutes being awake, which is not great. I actually remember this evening fairly vividly. It wasn't a very good evening at all. You can see here is your REM, which is this light color, which is generally these numbers over there. So if this is the time I went to bed and the time I woke up, you can see the majority of your REM sleep takes place in the latter half of your sleep cycle. And then over here, we've got the deep sleep. All right, obviously, because I went to bed late, I've missed out on roughly 1 hour and 15 minutes of deep sleep. So you can see there, that's obviously reflected there. So what's quite nice to see is when you work wear your wearable over time, you can actually start to compare what a good night's sleep is, what a bad night's sleep is, and actually how you felt after both. I know some of the athletes I worked with don't like this kind of thing because they say they feel like they slept well, but their data reflects otherwise. And I'm of the opinion, like, day to day things can change, but overall, if you were to see good numbers, let's say for example like that, or like that, you're generally going to feel pretty good. But if you start to see lots of these kinds of numbers, you're definitely going to feel a difference in that, both mentally and emotionally. And then over here, so 88 is not a bad score. You can see awake time, definitely less, 14 minutes, which is pretty good. The amount of REM sleep, you can see here, quite high. My deep sleep, spent quite a bit of time in deep sleep. Again, because I went to bed earlier, so 25 past 9, I was basically asleep before 10 o'clock, and you can see there's quite a bit of my deep sleep trending there. So quite a contrast, but again, it's nice to see because, roughly 8 hours of sleep, but I'm spending the majority of my sleep in restorative sleep, so both in REM and deep sleep. And that is, it's really helpful because then you wake up the next day and you feel like you can actually take the day on. So when we look at sleep, like, there's obviously a plethora of reasons why we don't sleep. Any of us that have kids will obviously be nodding furiously here, but we obviously, when we're looking at sleep, like, there are some factors that we can control. So one of the first things that you look at is your temperature control. So basically, the temperature of the room will make a difference. And if you think back to middle of summer, no aircon or fan, really don't sleep well. So the temperature is way too high. Your body temperature can't get down low enough, your core body temperature, to get you into your restorative sleep. So you end up in a lot of light sleep, and you kind of wake up the next day feeling a little bit tired because you haven't slept that well. Generally speaking, if we're talking about an actual temperature, they talk about 19 degrees Celsius as a temperature. So for most of us in the summer, that's lovely. And then obviously winter, you can just open a couple of windows and your temperature control is much better. The next thing is obviously your schedule of sleeping. So I generally wake up at 5 o'clock every day. I've got an early wake up time of 4 o'clock, but that is pretty much 6 days a week. There is the odd day that I might sleep in until 6. Again, I have children, so you're not going to get a nice sleep in on a weekend. But generally speaking, like my wake up time is fairly regular, and my bedtime therefore has to be as well if I want to create any kind of consistency. So even on weekends, it's very rare that I'm going out late. Gosh, I sound old. Um, but if you want to look at really improving your sleep, you definitely need to try and look at your schedule and try and get some kind of consistency. So maybe there's a time on either side, so both evening and morning, give or take half an hour to 40 minutes for your late or early sleep-ins. The way that we fall asleep and the time leading up to us falling asleep is often important. So one of the things that a lot of people do is they exercise after work. Again, being a fitness trainer, I have to be sensitive to the fact that people don't have time to be able to do this kind of thing. And the only time they have is 7 o'clock at night. Once the kids have gone to bed, they go off to gym. The challenge with that, though, is that an exercise or a training session later on in the afternoon or early evening has the same effect as drinking a cup of coffee. So again, I know there's a lot of us that drink coffee at night. I was one of them. But when you start to wear your wearable and you start to wear it for a long period of time, you start to notice that when you drink stimulants and don't drink stimulants, like you can actually see what this does to your numbers. And again, if we're talking about being refreshed, waking up fresh, waking up with enough energy to be able to give the best to the people that you work with, these are kind of some of the things that you need to consider. So caffeine has a half-life of around about 10 to 12 hours. So if you are going to bed at 9 o'clock, you work that out. Basically, you're not really drinking much coffee after 2 in the afternoon. What we do or how we spend our time in the evenings, what we're looking at. So screen time is obviously important too. Making sure that we don't just stare at the screen and scroll, doom scrolling while there's some kind of TV show on, in the background. That kind of stuff. It's mentally stimulating, both in terms of the light that goes into your eyes, but also in terms of your brain's ability to process information. So if you are able to possibly look at having an approach of subtraction rather than addition when it comes to your nighttime schedule, what kind of things can you take out that will help streamline your bedtime your bedtime preparation. And when you have that mindset, what you start to do is you actually start to take out stuff that doesn't really matter. Like no one's really going to notice me scrolling on Instagram. I don't think people care whether I like their stuff or not. So if I take that out and I replace it with either doing a bit of reading, or if I have an opportunity to do some stretching, half of us are expected to pick up some kind of injury playing golf. So stretching should be something important for us to do to prevent injuries. If it's not that, it could just be, having a conversation with your significant other. But basically trying to reduce the amounts of mental stimulation that we have will help your body fall asleep faster. Light exposure is quite important. So overhead lights, so like the one I've got going on here, almost mimics an overhead sun. So at the moment, in my current state, my brain thinks that it's still daylight. So it would be interesting to see what my sleep looks like just now. I'm very much the kind of person that puts the least amount of light on in the house as possible, as long as you don't trip over the dog or something like that. Try and keep the rooms as dark as possible. What's interesting about your brain and how your brain processes information is it's more about the angle of the light coming into your eyes rather than the amount of brightness. So if you've got low lights, side lamps, that kind of thing, or even turn the lights off in the room and kind of have a light somewhere else, so thinking about a kitchen light and sitting in the lounge kind of thing, what your brain does is that basically almost recognizes that as late afternoon, early evening, and it helps your brain to wind down. Caffeine and alcohol, I'm not going to offend too many people here, but I think obviously common sense has to at some point kick in here. Obviously, having 2 or 3 espressos before you go to bed is not necessarily a good thing because it is a stimulant. And what it does is it obviously promotes increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased blood circulation to the muscles, and so on and so forth. Very similar to, like I said, a training session. So obviously caffeine for the most part is not very good. However, I do have a client who saw an improvement in their recovery when having caffeine at night. We picked that up over time, and it was one of the trends that we picked up. So, I don't want a blanket statement and say that caffeine is bad for you, but for the most part, it is. But you can use your wearable to actually see what works and what doesn't. So alcohol has a very similar effect too. It also prevents us going into our restorative sleep. So although you might go into sleep and you pass out, it's not necessarily a lot of restorative sleep there. So because your body is having to process essentially the poison that you're putting in your body, although again, the parents might say it's a necessary poison to deal with kids. The alcohol obviously does have an effect on your body's ability to slow down. And I think what's important here is obviously like we're all trying to improve the sleep, you're trying to improve your recovery numbers, but there are going to be those odd occasions where you have a bad night, like that example that I showed earlier. And what's important with those kinds of anomalies is to try not make up for those, is to try and stay in your routine as much as possible, because breaking the routine has more of a negative effect than the one night's bad sleep. So yes, there is space for naps, but generally speaking, as long as it doesn't affect your nighttime sleep, then you should try and stick to your regular schedule. So one of the biggest things about wearing a wearable of sorts is understanding a little bit more of what this does for your nervous system. So your central nervous system is basically made up of your sympathetic or your fight or flight nervous system, which is essentially the system that runs throughout the day. It's about movement, it's about processing of information, and that pretty much runs from the moment you wake up to the moment you close your eyes. Your parasympathetic nervous system is essentially the rest and digest, also the system that almost turns off the sympathetic nervous system. So there's a very delicate balance between the two. And obviously, when we talk about recovery and we talk about sleep, your ability to go into your restorative sleep, so your REM and your deep sleep, is very much a parasympathetic response. And if we are stimulating ourselves with caffeine or alcohol or bright lights or mental busyness, you're not able to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And where we see this is in your variable called HRV, or heart rate variability. So you can see over here, you've basically got obviously your higher HRV gives you better recovery numbers. And obviously then because you're recovering, you can then handle low workload better. Lower HRV is indicative of stress, fatigue, overtraining, and possibly illness. Something I've been dealing with for the last couple of weeks. So it's been interesting to see what it's done to my stuff. Obviously, this is very personal and specific. So I've had elite athletes with an HRV of around 50 to 60, and I've had clients with an HRV of around 200. What is important for us to understand about HRV is what are your trends? So where is your baseline? And when you have variance in your baseline, that's when you can start to make adjustments. So if you have a look over here, it's just a small graph. So basically, low HRV, very consistent gapping between successive heartbeats, whereas a higher HRV, you can see here the gapping is definitely different. Again, so just a snapshot of heart rate variability from day to day versus week to week. So we can see here, this was fairly recent. I was quite sick in this week, actually. You can see that from day to day, the heart rate variability changes quite a lot. And then from week to week, you can see there's a less variance, but you can definitely see more trend. So that was, I think I might have had COVID that week. Got a little better, and then now got sick with some kind of stomach thing. So you can see then how the HRV obviously changes. So things that you can do to improve your HRV or improve your parasympathetic response, obviously quality sleep is one of those things. So managing your stress and recovery, it's not necessarily one of those things like just stress less. There's obviously things that very practical things that you can do. So breath work you can do. Interesting fact is that if nasal breathing is a very effective way of engaging the vagus nerve, which is obviously connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. So nose breathing or breathing through your nose versus your mouth is an easy way to actually slow your heart rate down, to slow your respiratory rate. Challenging for those of us that suffer with sinus and the allergies. So the other thing is cold exposure. So lots of fads, lots of people doing ice baths. The Wim Hof method, like there's tons of people doing this kind of stuff. So for me, cold water exposure doesn't have to be as extreme as some people make it out to be. But when you put yourself in a stressful situation like a cold bath or a cold shower, you're using your breath work to be able to override your fight or flight response, gives you the ability to basically slow down your heart rate and your stress response when you're in stressful situations throughout the day. Sometimes a cold shower is really difficult to do in the morning, but at least then you've done a difficult thing before you've even got to work. So quite cool to do. Mindfulness and downtime. So interestingly, Dr. Izzy Justice actually talks about the fact that, like, with people being as connected to their phones and connected to information now, we should be looking at a 3-day weekend as opposed to a 2-day weekend. Very much not possible here. So if we can't have a 3-day weekend, then what we need to do is we need to take moments throughout the day where we take 10 or 15 minutes to be intentional about trying to defrag, maybe process the day, how the morning went, or just enjoy the beauty of some of the locations we get to work in. Very fortunate to work at a golf course that has lovely vistas, and to be able to actually just sit there and eat your lunch for 10 or 15 minutes is sometimes the necessary break that you need just to take on the afternoon. So training, obviously the no pain, no gain thing that doesn't really exist anymore. So if you hear someone say that, it's not true. Overtraining is a real thing, and understanding when your body's not at 100%, that you can't just put out hard sessions, well, toughen up, have a shot of PPC cement and carry on. I think there's some wisdom to understanding that, listen, if my body's not doing great today, if I didn't sleep well last night, I probably need to do a different kind of training session. So maybe I need to do a mobility session. Maybe I need to do a sauna. Maybe now I need to do an ice bath. So there are certain things that I can do that still have value to my body, but without without overstressing my body to the point then when I actually do more harm than good. Nutrition and hydration is another thing that we can do. So obviously hydration is important. Your body requires a lot of water. So being dehydrated puts your body in a stressful state. We don't want that. So hydration is fairly important. Nutrient-dense foods. And again, stimulant management, which is a fancy way of saying don't drink so much coffee. Again, like, we have to cope, but I think that there are other ways that we can get around that. And obviously then consistent routines, so our bodies are, like I said earlier, very much around rhythm and routine. So getting into consistent routines will also help improve your HRV over time. So strain and recovery is, again, another one of those metrics that we can measure. So basically putting a number to how busy you've been throughout the day. So for someone who's doing anywhere between 7 to 10 training sessions in the gym, you're giving a lot of yourself. You're busy, you're walking around, you're picking up weights, packing weights away, helping people with training, with exercises, and then still having to go and do admin. And that puts a lot of strain on your body. And understanding that, okay, my work day actually has strain, and I'm also going to put strain on my body when I exercise or if I play golf. it's important for us to be able to measure that. So a couple of terms from the various wearables. So strain is one element. Body battery, I know Garmin uses a term called body battery. Your readiness score, I think the Aura Ring uses readiness score to give you an idea of what your recovery number looks like. Movement index. So essentially, if we were to look at this, I think I might have it on the next. There we go. So there's a couple of screenshots from a few of the different variables. So I think this is Ultra Human, which is what I use. This is Whoop, and then this is your Garmin. So typically your body battery would be a numerical indication of how much your body has recharged while you're sleeping. So what you'll see over here, I actually just need to move this so I can show you guys. All right, so what you'll see over here is like this was one of the nights I still wore my watch. So your body recovers quite nicely. You get to a certain level, and then all of this orange is essentially strain. So, and you can see like there's certain things are more stressful than others, but strain basically drains your body battery. So over time, throughout the day, your body battery goes down. What I quite like about the Garmin specifically is the fact that because this works a little bit more like a phone battery, you know, you can start to manage your day based off how much you have to do. So for example, if I trained and I've got down to, let's say 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, and I've only got 25% battery, I'm going to deplete this quite a lot. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to bottom out. So I don't want to get down to single digits when it comes to recovery, because then the chance of me getting up to the 90s again is quite slim. So I quite like that from Garmin. So Whoop over here, again, this is quite nice. One of my clients, Saturday night wasn't a great night, so I don't know if this was a miscut and he decided to go out, but you can see that Saturday was definitely an outlier with regards to the rest of the sleep. But then when you sleep, the higher the sleep scores over here, you can actually see the better the recovery. So there's definitely a correlation between how you sleep and how you recover. What's quite nice with this is they give you a graph showing you how that balances out against your daily strain, which is quite cool. And then this is, like I said, one of the rings you can see. So dynamic recovery. So that was, I was pretty sick on that day, I remember. So quite a low recovery number, and you can see the recovery was low because the resting heart rate went up outside of my normal trend. Skin temperature went up, my HRV went down, and my sleep index wasn't great, and obviously didn't sleep nicely that day. So because of all of these factors, it correlates to a poor recovery score. Luckily that day, I didn't have much to do because it was an off day, so you could basically just chill at home. Over here is a better day. So not perfect, but you can see if we correlate between the two, the resting heart rate was lower, skin temperature was better, the HRV was lower than that, interestingly, but still within the range. The HRV for that particular night was better than my poor night's sleep, and then obviously the sleep index was better as well, which correlates to a better score. So when we look at like a typical workday, and this is kind of like the conversation that I have with my golfers, is basically what do you do with this information? So if you recover nicely, so if you've got a high recovery score, you're in the green, you're up above 75%, whatever that is, it essentially means that from a physiological perspective, your body is ready for a busy day, or could typically take on a busy day. If your recovery starts to dip somewhere in the middle, what you could do here is you could be a little bit more intentional about, okay, are there one or two tasks that I need to do in the day that I could possibly either push out to tomorrow, or let me make sure that I give the best to the people early in the morning, and then try and do some recovery stuff around lunchtime so that I have something more in the tank for the afternoon. Interestingly, I have a friend who lives in the corporate world, or he works in the corporate world, and he wears a Garmin And interestingly, when he walks into the office, his secretary asks him what his body battery is. And based off of what the number is, she will then schedule his day accordingly. So if he's somewhere in the middle, or if he's running low, what she'll do is she'll typically move some meetings around and only prioritize one or two very important meetings that she can't move. She'll move those early on in the day. Or if he's recovered nicely, then she knows, okay, he's ready for, whatever comes into the office. So interestingly, that you've got a corporate person using his health data to basically plan his day and not just suck it up and go through the workday. Because at the end of the day, you're sitting in a meeting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You haven't slept well for 2 days in a row. Your recovery's in the red. You're not going to be at your best. And sometimes we can't do anything about that. And obviously that's, we have to manage those kinds of things. But if you have the opportunity to manage it, then, that's what the data is there for. One of the things that we notice is, again, I like trends. So if I'm looking at a golfer or I'm looking at myself, you are going to get those days where you have quite a few busy days in a row. And it's important that when you have those kinds of stretches, that once things calm down, that you try and either take a day off or try and give yourself a morning off, so that you don't basically burn yourself out. One of the important things to consider, and obviously this is my exercise pitching moment, is that basically exercise can increase your body's ability to handle load or make you more resilient. So if a 7-hour workday previously would absolutely deplete your battery, over time with some exercise, you can actually then not deplete as much, or you could maybe handle an 8-hour day or a 9-hour day with the same kind of feel. There's a cool story. I worked with a golfer for a couple of years back, and he only had basically 3 to 4 weeks of capacity on tour. So his first week was a bit rusty. Second week, he played pretty well. The third week would kind of depend on how the second week went. And then the fourth week was a bit of a coin toss as to how he played. He would either miss a cut by millions or he would play well. But typically, he could only handle 4 weeks. And we trained pretty consistently for about 8 months. And he went into a stretch of tournaments where he played 10 tournaments in 11 weeks. And his best performance was the 11th week, the final week. So quite a nice testament. I mean, obviously there's a lot that goes into making or missing cuts, but for him, he felt like he had a bigger engine, better capacity. Need to go to the next one. So when it comes to mental health, so this is something obviously has become a lot more prevalent of late. I think a lot of people have struggled after COVID with mental health. People are being a little bit more vocal about it. They're sharing their stories about it a lot more. So I think it is something that we need to take into account. And because we work with people all the time, not only do we put ourselves at risk of burnout and mental health struggles, but also the people that we work with. Often a lot of them are very high functioning individuals, and we have to be careful, and we can possibly help them when it comes to this topic. So when we look at the data, so things that I typically look out for are over a week or two if I'm losing sleep. So if my sleep volume is down, I'm in too much sleep debt. Things like your heart rate, your resting heart rate increasing, recovery scores, so low to average recovery scores over a week or two. Those are kind of indicators that, look, my body's not coping well, and I need to do something about this. So either taking a morning off or taking a day off completely, or possibly taking a day to go into nature to try and recover a little bit. Things like massages help with that. So sports massage is a great tool. But again, those are, I want to say for the better part, those are band-aids. Like, we need to be better with our sleep and the stuff that we pick up on your wearable. The amount of time, obviously, like I said earlier, the amount of time we spend processing data is pretty scary. Because we're processing so much information, we end up in we end up with a lack of parasympathetic activation. So your body's in a constant state of fight or flight, which means that ultimately you're going to be burning out. So a couple of helpful tips. So having a handle on your health metrics. So again, looking through it, getting an understanding of what your metrics are, not just the metrics. Understanding sleep, recovery, load will all help you, because you can start to make basically informed changes to your day, which is the second point. So not every day is an equal day. So there's some days that are obviously busier, but try, if you can, manage your diary a little bit to have, if you've had a couple of busy days, to maybe have a lighter day or two, so that we balance that out a bit. Try and be a little bit more preemptive when it comes to your leave and time away. So obviously, ideally, we want to preempt a busy period of time. So for me, rest is both directions. So you rest because you've done a lot of work, and also you rest because there's a busy period coming. So to try and keep an eye on both is really helpful, and to try and be proactive about booking that is will put you in a good place in the long run. And then also having some good boundaries in place. Again, I know this is difficult if someone messages you and they want a booking for a lesson tomorrow morning. At least try and protect certain family times, or say, hey, listen, like, I'll phone you tomorrow morning, or hey, listen, book online. You can book me online and pick a slot that fits you. I think it's important for us, because at the end of the day, if we in a situation where we are constantly answering messages, emails, we kind of, what we tolerate, we cultivate. So it means that we are always on call. And then the other thing is also, being able to ask for help. So sometimes, that very practically, it's getting an accountant to help you with your books. Sometimes chatting to someone, either a friend that's been in a similar situation, or a mentor, or potentially a professional like a psychologist. Sometimes you just need a little bit of an outsider's perspective on what you're doing. Also, we tend to download on our most loved ones, and that's not always a good thing for dynamics. But yeah, being able to reach out to someone is something that is important. So implementing a wearable. So again, choosing a wearable that best fits your criteria. So there's going to be a lot of reasons why you will choose something. I would say the consistency of using a wearable is more important than which wearable you choose. You want to make sure that we be able to pick up trends in your data, and you can only do that if you wear it on a consistent basis. If you decide to buy a wearable now, I would say wear it for a month before you start becoming critical of what your data looks like. There's a lot of software that goes into the wearables these days, and a lot of the AI and the algorithms will start to pick up your rhythms. So give it a bit of time to calibrate. Check the data in the morning again. So a lot of the times the data will confirm how you feel. But check it in the morning. You don't have to keep checking it throughout the day, but it is a good idea to kind of start your day. Just check where you are, where you're at, and then if you need to make any changes to your day, that you do so. When it comes to making lifestyle changes, what I would suggest is make one change and see what it does to your metrics. Again, so if you are the kind of person that drinks coffee at night, instead of cutting out the coffee and reading a book and turning all the lights off and doing some yoga, I would say do one thing for a couple of weeks and see what it does to your data. It's very good that I tell you all these things are good, but often it's better if you see the change yourself. And then obviously what works for me may not work for you. Look at the pattern of your metrics to adjust your daily load. So again, it's not just, well, toughen up, you got to do this thing. Like, I think there's science available, so let's use it. And again, looking at from an elite athlete perspective, I talk to them about the difference between participation and excellence, or participation and competing. So you could be at work, but you're not really at work because you haven't slept well. So something to take into account. There's a couple of tips. know I'm rushing through this a little bit. I just want to honor the time. So nasal breathing helps, like I said, to stimulate the vagus nerve, which is linked to the parasympathetic nervous system. So nose breathing, the double inhalation technique. I don't know if you guys have noticed, like if you're breathing normally, sometimes you'll take that second breath. That's basically your parasympathetic nervous system trying to kick in. Voluntary cold water exposure. I would say from a timing perspective, they're talking about around about 3 minutes of cold water or voluntary cold water exposure. Roughly 2 to 3 times a week is enough. You don't need more than that. So if you want to do more, you're more than welcome to. But in terms of the actual, to see a change in your metrics, you're looking at 2 to 3 times a week of 2 to 3 minutes at a time. So it's not as dramatic as most people make it look. Going for a daily walk is really helpful, especially if it's in nature or on a golf course. Being in a beautiful place, seeing a lot of trees and gardens and flowers and that kind of thing helps to de-stress you. It's also a little bit of physical activity. Daily stretching, like I said, most of us are prone to some kind of injury, so stretching would be helpful anyway. Pets have often been used, and dogs and cats have been used for a long time as a form of treatment for things like stress, anxiety, and a lot of mental health disorders. So like patting your dog is probably a helpful thing to do. Interesting conversation with Dr. Easy Justice again. So he said if you can't get out of the office, what you can do is every 5 to 10 minutes within an hour period, if you go onto your phone and look at some of your holiday photos, it actually mentally, it takes you to those holiday venues, and you could almost down-regulate a little bit by looking at photos of your holidays. So for those of us that are stuck in a room without a window, and then obviously like reading at night, like I said. That's quite a bit. So what I do have beyond the questions, I've got a couple of references which I will make available, and then I have got a couple of purchase links here for you guys. So I'll send that through to the guys to obviously refer through to you. But are there any questions?
If you have a question, please just feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Yeah, just in terms of, there we go.
Yeah, no, go for it, Roncho.
No, Louis, all yours, eh?
Okay, Gav, sorry, I wanted to ask something about this whole sound thing.
Yes.
What is your verdict on the sound, that monotone or that white noise, or like, what's your take on it?
Are you talking specifically about someone who puts like rain sounds on when they go to sleep?
Yeah, there's like also that frequency that they say,
Yes.
because obviously some of us have a bit of ADD, and we need that noise to bring us down a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I mean, if what you start to do is the sound starts to, obviously there's a lot of research that goes into the brainwave and the matching of brainwaves and that kind of thing. But I think, again, what it helps you to do is it focuses on the sound as opposed to focusing on what's around you. So immediately it's more of a dialed focus. And because it's something that sort of pops up in the background, becomes a bit of a background noise, it's almost like it becomes a bit monotonous. So I don't know if you've ever sat on the beach and you kind of just almost like stare at the waves and the sound of the waves coming in. It's that monotonous, rhythmical kind of sound that comes through. Like it definitely dips into the parasympathetic. It wouldn't be my first thing that I use to calm myself down. There's probably a few others but I know that there are some people that struggle to down regulate at night, and so they put on like a sound specific to various sound waves.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man. Yeah, just always wonder about that one.
Yeah, just a quick one on wearables that you've discussed today. Which is the better one to get? I know you said it's based on your sort of needs or all those types of stuff, and I also know that these things can be quite pricey. So which ones would you sort of recommend for daily use, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the kind of person who kind of just wants to put the wearable on and then forget about it, you can look at something like a ring. I've got the Ultra Human ring as an example. I know the Whoop band is also one of those things you kind of put on and then you sort of forget about it. There are one or two others. I know Fitbits have also got a sort of more cost-effective version, which is literally just a band. It does have the time on it, but it's essentially just disappears. Those all I think most wearables kind of start in and around the 4,000 to 5,000 Rand mark. And they can obviously then go all the way up to, if you're getting your fancy Tag Heuer smartwatch or your Marq Garmin's, like those are sort of 50 grand and above. But those are all generally like once-off kind of costs. I know there are one or two wearables like the Whoop Band and the Aura Ring are subscription-based, and that's obviously a dollar subscription. So we're sort of at the mercy of our people saying silly things out in the world, and all of a sudden we take a knock on the dollar, and all of a sudden you're paying more for your wearable. So I think it comes down to, I would say if you're looking at a wearable anywhere between, I want to say between 5 and 12,000 Rand is probably a good brand or bandwidth. There's some really good wearables within that bracket. And like I said, there are a couple of medical aids that will subsidize a wearable too. So, there's some discounts there, and like the Ultra Human ring, I've got a bit of a discount thing there as well. So I think ultimately it comes down to, investing in your health. If you're going to buy the ring or the watch once off and then basically write it off over a few years, it's not very expensive at all. And if you think of the cost of the medication that you would have to go into in a state of burnout, or the amount of money you'd have to spend to go and see a therapist, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to monitor yourself and manage yourself. And therefore, like, it becomes quite a cost-effective investment in yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Gav. I appreciate that. Any other questions?
So let's go. Just a nice one for me, Gav. It's just like, and I know it's also a touchy subject with a lot of guys. Is there's a point where we kind of rely on the sleep tablet in order just to get that rest, because you just kind of, you have to shut down. Like, where do you draw the line? Like, okay, that's enough. I don't need to actually take this anymore.
Yeah, I think when you start to look at like changing the lifestyle, it's important to understand it takes a little bit of time. I'm a huge proponent of the morning routine. So waking up at a very similar time every morning, actually getting outside if you can and trying to get some sunlight exposure early on. Again, Dr. Andrew Huberman talks a lot about this. Is really helpful in helping to set that circadian rhythm. But then in terms of like, the ability to fall asleep, because we're so highly strung and you're processing so much data, it's important to start putting boundaries in place, especially in terms of work, and then start one by one, start to put healthy habits in place. And what you'll start to notice, I mean, the changes might be minuscule over time, but what you can start to see is, okay, reading before I go to bed is really helpful in terms of quietening my mind. If I do a little bit of stretching, like, it really helps. Like, I can see there's maybe a 5 or 10% change in my sleep. So you start to do these small things, and over the course of a few months, you start to see that there's actually less need for for medication. I wouldn't necessarily go off off the bat. Obviously, there's a reason why you're on the medication. So again, you're going to be consulting with your health professional. But I think that there are definitely ways to do it, and if you can get off the medication, that's super helpful. But the question I ask is, why is it there in the first place? So is it there because I'm not sleeping enough?
Yeah, so like just on that side, like we kind of struggle to like turn off. I mean, we're actually so busy. Like we work shifts and stuff, so we up really early in the morning, but sometimes we work like very, very late. So we only get home at 10 o'clock at night. So to get home and then we only kind of eat things then, it's a very bad, routine that we're in at the moment, but it's very hard to break. That's why I'm kind of just trying to find out, like, how do you mend that where you're trying to do everything at once, work and family, sorry, and like a whole bunch of stuff, you know what I mean? And we're trying to fit it all in, but there's one point where like I just have to shut down, and that's the only kind of way we can.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think it's, and again, like sometimes stuff happens ad hoc and short notice, and then you don't really have much much response time to that. If that is the pattern, there are great tips, so if you're working late, for example, like if there's an opportunity to do something like a nap, so there's something called an NSDR, a non-sleep deep rest protocol, which is essentially like almost like a deep breathing meditation, call it what you will, but basically a moment where you lie down and actually concentrate on your breathing specifically through the nose. And if you spend 10 or 15 minutes in that kind of state, it actually really helps the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in. So it's like a short burst of rest, I guess, knowing that, okay, cool, I might be going a bit later, my sleep's going to be a bit compromised. I try to say to the golfers, you guys know that you're going to be, changing time zones. Like don't be a victim of the time zone change. You can change a few things to preempt the tiredness that you might experience. So, and that for me, it just requires a bit of planning and a bit of foresight into it. It's like, okay, next week, Wednesday, I'm on, late shift. So I'll make sure that I try and rest up beforehand, try and gain a bit of sleep in the days preceding that, so I don't have as much of an effect.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'd love to pick your brains kind of off the chat line and then chat to you.
Yeah, more than welcome. Yeah, you can drop me a line, no problem at all.
Excellent. Thanks, Gavin. Appreciate today, man.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Gav. I think that brings us to an end for today. Thanks for your webinar and your time spent today. We really appreciate it. Also to all the pros that came out today, thanks again. All of the best to everyone, and we'll see you all at the next webinar. Enjoy your evening, everyone.
Thank you.